Welcome to Resiliency, the podcast, the place for stories, strategies, and inspiration around how to embrace change, overcome challenges, and redefine resilience in today's ever-evolving world. I am Jenn Quader. I'm a strategic communicator and CEO of a company called The Smart Agency. I am joined by my brilliant and illustrious co-host, Dr. Kelly Culver. She holds a PhD in strategic resilience from the Paris School of Business, and she's a widely recognized international business consultant with her company, the Culver Group, and that is based in Canada. She is our Canadian princess. Our show is a global podcast that brings together diverse, intelligent individuals who inspire and educate and motivate our audience so they can find their own inner strength in everything from the minutiae of everyday life to world-altering problems. And today, we are really honored to have an incredible guest, Miss Alexis Jeffries. She is a tech marketing and entrepreneurship guru, you guys, and also an educator, which has a really special place in my heart. And she has a really long list of accolades that I am honored to share with you. Miss Alexis Jeffries is a technology product strategy executive and also serves as a marketing and advertising consultant for several Fortune 500 companies. Alexis is also the expert in residence and adjunct professor of technology and entrepreneurship at the University of Southern California, USC Marshall School of Business. And if you thought that was all, she also sits on the National Board of Directors of the Network for Teaching Entrepreneurship, NFTE, and she serves on the Presidential Advisory Council for the American University of Paris. Now, beyond that, Alexis got her start reporting as a personal finance journalist, and she's written for some amazing publications like Money, The New York Times, Essence, Black Enterprise, CNN Money, and many, many others. She holds a bachelor's degree in journalism and political science from Northwestern University. She also holds a master's degree in global communications from the American University of Paris, where we had the opportunity to meet her, and also an MBA from the University of Southern California. This is a wonderful, ambitious, driven, and accomplished woman. And beyond that, you guys, beyond all of these accolades, she's working to publish a children's book. Talk about a whole human, beautiful life. Miss Alexis Jeffries, welcome. We are honored to have you today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited and honored to be here.
Alexis, welcome. Jen and I are in two different places. I'm in Canada. She's in the U.S. Where in the world are you today?
I am also in the United States and not that far from Jen, actually. So I live in Los Angeles, which is where I'm based and originally from. I've lived in a lot of different places, but I spent a lot of years trying to get back to LA. So I'm really happy to be here.
It's a great place to be.
Especially when it's cold, because it tends to be a little bit warmer. So, when in doubt, I'm going to choose the warmth. Sorry, Dr. Culver. I apologize. I know okay. Canada, gets a little chilly. I know.
Well, no, actually, it's 35 degrees today. That's why I look like this.
And yet again, 35 degrees to us would be freezing because, of course, we're on a whole different system.
Yeah, whole different thing.
Right.
Let's kick it off with, what does resilience mean to you?
It's a great question. And again, thank you both for having me. I'm really excited to talk about this because of my own shared experiences trying to learn about resiliency, but also being able to share this more broadly and what was our TED experience in Paris. But for me, and as I shared in my talk, rest is really the core of resiliency. And so for me, resiliency is about being able to push forward despite challenging circumstances. But you can't do that if you're exhausted. Right. And so I have done my own exploration and research into, well, what then does it really mean to be able to take rest so that way you can be resilient, right? One has to beget the other. And rest is actually this very simple concept that we oftentimes get wrong, or it seems very complicated for us. And that's largely just because we don't know what it is and how to take rest. And so rest is really about just generally ceasing activity and being still. So that way you can replenish and refresh yourself and recover from a previous state of full on, going hard, right? And so for me, being able to rest efficiently and thoughtfully begets the ability to be resilient, which is to continue to push forward despite challenging circumstances, is the nature of life.
Beautifully said, and also just something that is so, I'd say, counterintuitive, which I think where therein lies its brilliance, right? Is that this is against the grain. So can you speak to that a little bit? And again, I'll remind our listeners that you are not only work in the corporate sphere, but you're an educator. So you're working with students. I assume are you working with both graduate and undergraduate students?
I do work with both, but mostly graduate students at the MBA level.
Amazing. So you're working with these people who are just beginning to craft these big careers for themselves. So how do you approach that counterintuitiveness? How do you approach the fact that you're telling them to slow down while speeding up?
Yeah, I mean, I think that students, human beings who are in school at really any level are somewhat at a crossroads, right? When you are in middle school, let's say, you're trying to decide, well, what type of person do I want to be in high school, right? Like all the movies and television shows are about kids in high school and Friday Night Lights and whatnot. And you're trying to think about, how do I rebrand myself? Who do I want to be? What kind of student do I want to be, in efforts of building whatever your future is going to look like? Then when you're in high school, it's kind of the same. Well, do I want to go to college? Do I want to work? Do I want to go to the military? Do I want to start a business? What are the paths and avenues for me to explore at this age? Who am I going to be once I reach 18 and become a quote unquote adult, right? And so we're constantly asking ourselves that question. And students, once they get to the collegiate and graduate levels, are on the same journey yet again. Some of them who are graduate students, in my case, who may have had some work experience and had the opportunity to explore what they wanted to do, they're at a kind of a crossroads, a fork in the road around, like, I don't think I really liked what I was doing. And the average MBA student goes back to school to switch careers, right? And so it's an opportunity to take a few years to sit back and say, what is it that I actually want to do? And more importantly, who I want to be. And I think that that's what I always encourage students to continue to ask themselves that question, even beyond the classroom. So once they walk across the stage, there's always an opportunity for asking, what do I want to do and who do I want to be? I have personally experienced that a lot because I've had, as you shared, many different careers. I've been a journalist. I've been an advertising executive. I've been a product strategist. I've been a consultant. I've done all these things. I've been an educator because I was willing to constantly ask myself, who do I want to be? Like, I'm feeling like I want to shift. And that's part of resiliency, is being able to constantly ask yourself the hard questions and then be able to make the pivot if necessary. If you decide, I want to be someone different, I want to do something different, and I'm going to go for that.
As you've eloquently said, you have to be able to listen and pick up all of the cues to know when it's time to change the track. We stay on track, but sometimes to be resilient, we have to change a track. And there are cues out there. We have to listen to them. And sometimes that means being comfortable sitting in the silence. Now, how do you do that? And how do you help your students learn to be comfortable sitting in the silence? Because the cues only come when we're really quiet.
Love that. Literally rest. Right? Like the whole resonance around this concept of, well, how can you sit in the silence and learn to listen and to even ask yourself the hard questions if there's a bunch of noise going on, if there's a bunch of, but God forbid, chaos going on around you, that you're just like, how do I make sense of anything if I want to move forward, if I haven't been able to sit in the silence and rest? And so that's a lot of what I have tried to explore and also teach others, is around asking yourself those questions requires you to take some space, and that requires you to get your rest via sleep. It requires you to get your rest via pursuing things that actually fill you up. So whether or not that's taking a vacation or taking a walk, something very simple. It doesn't have to be complicated and expensive like taking a vacation. It can just be whatever you need to do to replenish yourself, so that way you can have the space and the silence necessary to explore, to do those deep dives. And I think the root, I will say, of being able to ask yourself those questions is, one, to know that you should be asking yourself those questions, right? That you have the safe space within yourself to ruminate. And then whatever you decide, be willing to action on. So it's always a multi-step process. But to your point, Dr. Culver, it's about, hey, look, giving yourself some space and being silent and still to ask yourself those hard questions. And then whatever I've come up with after I've taken my space, now I'm going to do, right? So it's a two-part process.
I think that the process part of that is what is so valuable for other people, because when if I'm someone who looks at your career, Alexis, and I'm young and I might be like, boy, there's no way I could do all that she's done. You've
over the place.
Exactly. And you've reinvented yourself over and over. And I love how you tie these kind of academic achievements also to these reinvention points in people's lives, because people do constantly come to these places where they say, I don't know what I want to do next. And I think that what you're doing is you're giving permission to say, yeah, sit in that. It's okay to not know. And then I want to just restate for our listeners kind of this clear process that I understood, which is to say, number one, you got to make the space. You got to make the space to rest. I heard you say sleep. I heard you say, Dr. Kelly, I heard you say silence. You have to make that space for yourself. And then you have to know to ask. And Alexis, I think that's a place we can dive into more is how to determine those questions to ask and to make sure that you are finding for yourself that place of resilience. And then I love be willing to act, because that's a place where I always see resilience as forward momentum, but it's a place that Dr. Kelly and I talk a lot, because she talks a lot about resilience as a mindset. And really, in my opinion, it's chicken and egg. You got to have the mindset to have the action. You got to have the action to have the mindset. What do you ladies think of that? I open the floor. Dr. C and or Alexis, what do you guys think?
I mean, I love it. I don't even think that I ever thought about, the process of resiliency and or rest in that sort of formulaic format. And I really love that. I do agree that I think it's kind of this 3-step process of sitting, right? So that's kind of like taking the space, asking yourself the questions and being willing to do it, and then do, right? So the sit, ask, and do is a 3-pronged process that we need to begin to give ourselves more permission to do, right? To your point, I think we get a lot of imposter syndrome. We get a lot of fear around, well, what happens if I take some space and let it be known that I don't know what I'm doing? Right? What if it's revealed to other people that I don't have it all together? That comes with a lot of judgment, a lot of shame. People think that they're supposed to be at certain places in their life based on their age or career accomplishments or whatever. And I think that we have to work as best as we can to get past this concept of should, in order to move forward positively and be resilient, right? This is where the resiliency comes in, is we got to get past the hard fears that we have in order to get to a place where we're moving forward.
It's the rest, recover, recuperate, re-energize. There's lots of these words. And I remember talking to a marketing director a year ago, and I said, we need to rethink the idea of resilience. And she said to me, no, it's too hard. When you put RE in front of a word, that means that the person you're talking to has to do something. And I said, but isn't that the point?
Yeah. Yes.
Isn't that the point? So I want you to reimagine, rethink, resituate, re-energize, revitalize. That's a doing. That's an action. Because if you don't act, you can't achieve something. And sometimes it's hard.
It's always hard. I think it's always hard, right? But, I think people who are resilient do hard things, right? And they give themselves the permission to do hard things. I tell my students, as well as myself, all the time, feel that fear, right? Because fear is an emotion, and we were blessed with a range of emotions that oftentimes we don't tap into or use because they're scary or for shame or whatever. But you can't feel happiness all the time. You can't feel, silliness all the time. So why are we afraid to feel fear? Why are we afraid to feel anger? Those are fleeting emotions. So they're passing, and they're never in a constant state of existence in our experience. So feel the feelings feelings and the emotions because they're valuable for you to know how to act and respond to them. And then whatever you're fearing, do it anyways. So I always tell my students, I write it on the board as soon as I start a school year. It's like, feel the fear and do it anyway, because it's going to be hard, but you can't escape hard things in this life. You are actually more resilient when you face the hard things and you do it.
Brilliant. Brilliant.
Amen.
Brilliant.
It's really, I'm looking for this. I was looking down below me. I have this Post-it note.
A ding bell.
I'm like, ding, ding. Cause ding, ding. I need a triangle. Cause really what you bring, this element of fear is huge. And the little Post-it note I was looking for says, you can look at fear as forget everything and run, or face everything and rise.
Yeah.
And you're inspiring your students from day one, face it and rise. And then beyond that, I want to say this, and I think this will be a very nice tee up to get us into Miss Alexis Jeffries' wonderful TEDx Talk, which is the talk that brought us together. But Dr. Culver, you brought up this resilience, renew, revitalize, etc. There's another word within all this, and it brings me back to the simplicity of Alexis, of your formula: sit, ask, do. And that word is remember. Mm-hmm. Because all we have to do is remember who we are. And we have to remember that outside of the confines of what we think we should be, as you said, Alexis, of what we are afraid of, we have to remember. And when we get quiet and when we rest is when we can remember who we are.
I love that. When I hear the word remember, I think of remind, right? Remind is the semblance of renewing your mind to think differently, to operate and move in a different way. And to Dr. Culver's point, it's not necessarily a bad thing that you have to do something different, right? But as the colloquialism goes, in order to get something different, you got to do something different. And so I think it's important for us to remember and to remind ourselves that we have the capacity, that we can do it. It will be scary, but you've done scary, hard things before. So what makes this any different? We just have to renew our mind in that way.
I love that and think it's the perfect intro because it's reminding ourselves to do it, but it's, as you just said, it's remind. It's reshifting the way we think about it. With that, I want to invite our listeners in to listen to a eye-opening take on rest as resilience that Miss Alexis Jeffries presented during the TEDx event back in March of 2024 at the American University of Paris. I will remind our listeners that we will listen through the talk, and then please stay tuned because we'd like to delve into more of what Alexis researched and how she was able to put this talk together and find out a little bit more just after. But with that, I want to invite you all to have a little rest and to tune into this really insightful and powerful talk entitled Rest as Resilience: How to Mindfully Recharge and Optimize for Success by Alexis Jeffries.
Have you ever been in a situation that was fear-inducing and stressful, and in response, you were neither stressed nor afraid? Can you imagine facing off against a lion or a bear and not only fail to register fear in your brain, but actually just calmly walk away in the opposite direction of that impending threat? It is quite rare to respond to a traumatic external stimulus in such a casual, relaxed fashion, as most of us would have been paralyzed by fear or simply blacked out from the pressure of having to make such a sudden and unexpected flight or fight decision. Now, while I cannot claim to have been accosted by a lion or a bear, despite living in the hills of Southern California, of which there are many roaming around in the wild, I can attest to having had a significant experience that for me was somewhat similarly traumatic or stressful. I was laid off from my job. Now, I know many of you may be thinking that a job layoff doesn't exactly equate to the same level of stress caused by a lion or a bear attack, but I can assure you that the pandemonium around my company and industry's sudden streak of layoffs struck a familiar chord in the hearts and lives of many, sending folks into a spiral of flurrying, rushed resume building and job application filing, oftentimes just mere moments after being let go from years of loyal employment. For me, here's how it happened. I woke one morning to a urgent email invitation to attend a company-wide town hall where, to my surprise, we were going to be notified about layoffs happening moments later. They said that some folks would receive emails letting them know that they were cut. Others would receive emails letting them know that they were safe. When I checked my email, I was cut. And my natural next response was I made myself a cup of coffee and breakfast, and I ate. That's it. Simple, no pressure, no stress, no dread, just a cup of coffee and a perfectly toasted bagel to jumpstart my morning as though it were any other day. Now, how is that possible, you might ask? Everyone else was frantically drafting goodbye emails or transferring personal documents off of work computers, while I was just casually indulging in a little bit of television and enjoying my breakfast. You must have hated your job. That's why. Some might think, right? But the reality is actually quite the opposite. I loved my job. I loved where I work, and my team and colleagues were some of the best I'd ever had the privilege of working with over the entire course of my career. So what then would have caused such a lack of panic to a sudden change in circumstances? Well, the truth is that my brain simply couldn't register any stress or panic because I was just so overloaded with work. If I had to describe that feeling of job loss, the word relief comes to mind. From working multiple jobs to building side hustles to mentoring and coaching, teaching, public speaking, hosting events, and caring for family and friends and the like, I was simply burnt out. While I had peers who were instantly on job boards looking for their next opportunity, all I could muster up the energy to do was make a cup of coffee. I simply needed rest. And it wasn't until that moment that I recognized how impactful rest truly is, not only for our mental and physical health, but for our ability to maintain peak performance in pursuit of both our professional and personal goals. See, the constant demands of life, from work and family to all sorts of commitments that we make and all sorts of responsibilities we've taken on, has kind of landed all of us on this proverbial rat wheel, trying to maintain pace in order to keep moving forward. It is as though if we were to slow down or even stop and take a break, that we would lose momentum or worse, lose ground. Although, even in science, that's not exactly how things work. For example, Sir Isaac Newton crafted this very concept when working on his 3 laws of motion, with the first law being an object at rest stays at rest, or if in motion, an object in motion remains in motion at a constant velocity until acted on by a net external force. Basically, if you're running a race, you can't exactly expect to slow down or stop and take a break to catch your breath and expect to cross the finish line first, right? At least that's what I thought before my job layoff. See, my job as a marketing executive at a large global technology company was pure motion. I was often running, sometimes literally, from meeting to meeting, drafting presentations and strategy documents, building business cases and writing performance reviews, leading team offsites, and or planning team happy hours that actually at the end of it weren't all that happy after an extensive and exhausting workday. My team was oftentimes so busy and had so much responsibility that we literally developed a burnout workstream to help support each other in preventing, burnout. We wrote articles and shared them with each other with helpful tips and tricks to avoid depleting ourselves. And at the end of it, the irony is that we spent so much time writing and researching these articles that we had added yet another item on our to-do list, leading to more burnout. For me, I was going at a breakneck pace in my career, constantly looking for the next opportunity to make more impact or secure a larger performance bonus. Per Newton's law, my motion continued at a constant velocity until acted on by a net external force, a massive company layoff that I didn't see coming and couldn't prepare for. Now, if not for this unexpected change in job status, I would have certainly continued at that same harrowing pace until exhaustion or stress would have landed me in the hospital, or worse. See, my object, my personhood, simply needed to be at rest for a while and stay at rest until I could recover and get back at it again. And it took a layoff at this pivotal point in my career for me to recognize that what was actually happening to me wasn't slowing down my pace in the race at all. It was actually preparing me for the much needed break that would help me prepare for the race ahead. Now, it doesn't have to take a massive or transformative experience for us to recognize this critical key life concept. Are you ready for it? Great. Rest is the leading ingredient for resilience. See, many think of resiliency in life and work as a cut and dry test of one's ability to work hard and push through and keep going against all odds. And to some degree, that's fair, but it's much more likely a definition for endurance than it is for resiliency. Merriam-Webster defines resilience as simply being one's ability to recover from and or adjust easily to misfortune or change. The definition literally tells us that recovery is a core part of being able to develop resilience and overcome stressful situations. So is rest not an active component of recovery? Without rest, there can really be no resilience. So what then is rest? It is simply defined, yet increasingly difficult for us to achieve given today's time constraints and demands on our physical resources. But simply put, rest is ceasing activity and being still in order to refresh, replenish, and recover. Straightforward, right? Not so much. Studies published in the Journal of Ergonomics and the Harvard Business Review abound with data and evidence of workers and societies around the globe that have transitioned from a work culture into a workaholic culture, suggesting that rest is commonly misunderstood and even harder to come by. See, taking rest is simply not something that most cultures celebrate globally. And it's really no surprise why that's the case. Starting at an early age, we commend that ambitious student for staying up late, burning the midnight oil, trying to finish a project, trying to pursue that ever elusive A+ grade. Or we celebrate the entry-level analyst for staying late in the office, picking up the slack for the rest of the team, silently acknowledging their grit and resilience for going the extra mile. While we do all of this rewarding of overworking by calling it resiliency, we're actually missing a key understanding of how overworking works against us in biology. Homeostasis is a fundamental biological concept which describes an organism's ability to continually restore and sustain itself for the maintenance of its own well-being. Now, when we overload or overwork or overextend ourselves, we're actually doing ourselves more harm than good because we're wasting immense amounts of energy in order to try to get back to homeostasis or balance. And to add insult to injury, our technology has made it so much easier to become workaholics and for our cultures to reward us for constant motion rather than periodic rest. We've somehow deemed taking breaks or finding time to replenish as lazy and unproductive. And the concept of self-care seems only reserved for those with vast financial or time-based resources, access to luxury spas, and enough disposable income to justify expensive purchases like high-end teas or robes to cozy up with whenever we get the rare opportunity to shut down our laptops or put down our cell phones. Let me be clear about something. Rest and self-care are not the same thing. Sure, your body would appreciate self-care, but rest is a requirement for continued performance, lest burnout lead to your untimely mental short-circuiting. You need rest to remain resilient. So how then should you get it? I believe there are 3 key ways to rest in order to become and remain resilient. Are you ready for them? To start, you can sleep. No, really, take a nap. According to the U.S. Centers for Disease Control, only 1 in 3 adults actually gets the appropriate and recommended amount of sleep every night. Now, specifically for Americans were having trouble sleeping long before and ever since the global COVID-19 pandemic. According to a study published a few years ago in the Journal of Sleep Medicine, about 1 in 3 participants had some sort of clinical chronic insomnia symptoms, and nearly 1 in 5 had an insomnia disorder. This data, which is actually rates double what they were pre-pandemic. Now, this data actually suggests that there is, in fact, a global sleep crisis. And therefore, it's not all that surprising why the TikTok girlies are serving up recipes for sleepy girl mocktails in order to help their followings catch some Z's. While there are all sorts of factors that affect one's ability to get a restful night's sleep, The value of sleep as a critical driver of rest is really undeniable. If you cannot rest, you cannot continue. Next, you should take a break, either before or after your nap. It's fine. Now, taking a break doesn't just look like indulging in your favorite candy bar or taking a walk outside so much as it pertains to anything you can do for a short period of time to help lighten your cognitive load. See, after every 90 minutes of intensive focus and work, your brain basically shuts down or slows down to near base level performance. Think of your brain like your computer's hard drive. One moment, it's working like magic or arguably like new. But then you open up a program that requires a lot of RAM to be used. Or you open up another tab next to the 100 tabs you already have open on your web browser, and suddenly your computer starts to slow down and make funny noises, glitch, and overheat. Newsflash, this is basically how your brain works. Too many tabs open or programs running leads to slower performance. So after 90 minutes, give it a rest. Go outside, get some fresh air or some natural sunlight if that's available to you. Or you can consider having lunch with friends and coworkers and not at your desk. Beyond the 90 minutes, you can take a vacation just to get a different change of scenery or a new environment. Whatever you find enjoyable to do within a break from a 90-minute intensive power working session will be a welcome reprieve for your brain in order to replenish before yet another sprint. Lastly, you can focus on what's important. Thriving, not striving. I remember having a conversation with a friend of mine who unfortunately got laid off in and around the same time that I did. And her words rang out like a megaphone on our call. She said, I think I'm glad I got cut. I don't want to strive anymore. And it was this concept of striving that really resonated with me. I mean, weren't we taught from a shockingly young age to always strive for the best, to achieve the greatest amount possible in our limited time here on this planet? For me, as a lifelong overachiever, it almost seemed foreign to me that I would spend any time in my life or work not striving. However, as I sat with her words, I began to recognize that being in a constant state of achievement orientation is actually the antithesis of rest. Which means we can't actually expect to strive and be resilient at the same time. Why not? Well, to be forever striving will lead to inevitably missing out on the experiences and the people around us, simply as they wouldn't be our target focus. See, to strive is to have tunnel vision on a goal. But have you ever thought, what happens outside of the tunnel? The problem with striving and not resting is that it leads to burnout that is more than just mental or physical. It's relational. If we're always striving towards the next goalpost or milestone, we never really stop to take in the forest for the trees, as the saying goes, and live presently in the experiences for what they are. See, we live in societies where we're constantly on our phones, interacting more digitally than we do in real life. It almost seems as though our screens give us more comfort than a hug would from a family member or even a stranger. So instead of spending so much time looking down at our devices, maybe we should consider looking up and looking around and experience life for what is happening around us. Rest gives us the mental fortitude necessary to be present and fully invested in the experience of living. The only thing we should strive for is to be present and accounted for during life's happenings and to relate to the world around us in ways that are both meaningful and impactful. For me, once I had the realization of my layoff actually set in a few weeks later, I too desired to fling myself into a very comforting state of sheer panic. But I never really got the chance to do so. I had too soon started enjoying pressing the snooze button, sleeping in a few minutes later every morning, or enjoying a glass of wine at lunch, going outside to catch some sun on the patio when I didn't have to be on a Zoom call. I took rest before I could even panic about being jobless, and I found myself much more ready to take on the challenge of finding a new job when the time came. When I did return to the working world, I was replenished, I was revived, and I was resilient. I had made it through the mental fog that unemployment easily produces, and I came out victorious. And for all of you, I hope the same. Not a job layoff, but that you might be fortunate enough to have an unexpected net external force throw your constant state of motion just slightly off balance and lead you toward a more sustainable way to live. One that includes rest, breaks, sleep, thriving, and many more memories you can recall fondly in the days to come. Thank you.
Oh, Alexis, it's absolutely brilliant, as it was when Jen and I watched you in the dress rehearsal, and then again as we saw you on the day of the TEDx.
Feels so long ago.
I know it feels like decades, but it, just a few short months ago, and I was really struck with all of the words that you used at the end, revitalize, and I'm thinking. You use the word sustainable, and it's almost like your talk is about teaching us how we can have more sustainable impact in our lives and in our world. So many lessons to take from what you've said. How has the TED Talk changed your life?
Wow, what a great question. I think it's really given me the opportunity to have more conversations with people that I would not have had access to otherwise, right? And that in particular refers to the large swath of people who have gone through layoffs over the past several years and are still going through them, right? I come from the technology industry, and so across big tech, there are layoffs happening even now. And I've had the opportunity to be invited to discuss some of the opportunities in the layoffs that happen for those who are having to experience that, and hopefully revitalize and encourage some folks to think of this opportunity as such, as an opportunity and not as some dire, drastic situation that they are facing and having to endure. And that, mind you, is a very privileged position to be in that you can tell someone, oh, you'll be fine. And they don't feel that way in the moment. They're like, what am I going to do? I need income and I may not be able to sustain myself for all that long. But it's really about letting them know you get the opportunity to take space now, right? So like when you didn't get the opportunity to do that because you were working until midnight or who knows when in order to get a project done that you may not have been that passionate about in the first place, but you had to do it in order to keep your job and keep your paycheck. Now it's an opportunity for you to, if only for a little while, take the space. And as, you know, Jen sort of helped us define earlier in our talk, that's really the first step, right? Is sit down and take the space so then you can start the process of asking the questions and then doing whenever you do find a new job.
What a brilliant way to turn something difficult into something resilient and then make it a platform, Alexis, because that's really what you've done is and because what you're speaking to is not just, hey, the importance of rest. We started the conversation with that, but what you're really speaking to is the importance of rest when there's a tidal wave. And that's what's happened in the tech industry is there's been a bit of a tidal wave as far as restructuring and how things are happening. And I find it interesting from your perspective, not only having been in the tidal wave, but as I'm saying, kind of leading the charge to be able to see, hey, there's a different way to handle this. Now, you and I had a chance to have a discussion after the TEDx event. And one of the things that you shared with me was that the TEDx itself, I think everybody knows there's a certain time limit on it. And so all of us had to kind of edit down our talks to a certain amount.
Keep it short and sweet.
Keep it short. Keep it in those TED. We all were fighting on that tech rehearsal day to get it down. But there was an element or a layer to your talk, but not only that, I'd say to your platform, to your research. And that you said didn't quite make it in because of that time limit. And I want to open the door to that discussion because it is so important. And it's something that is very real in our world today. And so the question is this tidal wave, as I call it, of layoffs, this new way of approaching these challenges, is this disproportionately affecting Black and brown people? And if so, why and what can we do about it? What's your take?
I do think that it's something that most corporations aren't really exploring and researching because they don't want to find out the truth of the reality of these layoffs. But starting during the pandemic and ever since, there has been a significant and disproportionate effect on both women and people of color via layoffs and via the restrictions that happened during the pandemic, right? Like if people can't successfully go to work or school and leave the house, right, without worrying about what happens with the internet and their kids, and they are perhaps the sole provider for their family or the majority provider for their family, this significantly affects their income and their ability to provide for the family, right? And so when it comes to the massive rounds of layoffs, Black and brown people are already, the least heavily represented percentage of tech workers across the industry. And so when you are doing mass layoffs and cuts across the board, those people are going to be disproportionately affected. And no one's thinking about, hey, look, let's say that this person, I'll call her Shelley, not to be confused with Dr. Kelly. Let's say that Shelley, is a graphic designer at a tech company and she gets laid off, but, she's a Black or brown woman and it takes her a long time, arguably a year, to find another role. The downstream effects of her being out of work for a year, whereas her peers can get other jobs more quickly, not only affects her income and her savings account because she's burning through that, but it also affects her retirement because that's 1 year of retirement income that she doesn't get the opportunity to invest. And that disproportionately affects her and her ability to retire at the same rate and or timeline as her peers who either got jobs more quickly or didn't face a job loss at all, right? And that's a systemic issue where on average, Black and brown people already cannot retire at the same rates or even expect to retire because we don't have the income to do so. So just 1 year of unemployment significantly affects people's long-term trajectory for their life. And I wanted the opportunity to kind of pivot the conversation to say, hey, look, while you are facing very real financial challenges during this period of unemployment, and some call it fun employment, and it is fun up until a certain point in time, right? When it's not so fun anymore because you don't have any money. I want it to be an opportunity to be used, right? Time is the greatest asset that we have that we cannot get back. You can get money back, right? And so when we are so focused in this life on, I got to get money, that seems to be the most valuable asset. And, I need a job. Well, what about time? The asset of time is something that you are exchanging for the money. So when you're not getting the money, guess what you have? You have the time. And so let's use our time wisely to figure out who we want to be, what we want to do, whether or not we want to go back into the same career that we had before, and just be more mindful and taking the rest strategically and not just sitting moping around. It sounds bad, but that's a long-winded answer to say that I want specifically people of color and women of color to be empowered to know that there is an opportunity for you to use your time and not just for a corporate entity. You can use it to give back to others in your family and communities, of which oftentimes we already do, but you can also use it for you. Start that business that you were afraid to start, right? Become that consultant that you were afraid to become. Write that book that you were afraid to write. Do the things that you wouldn't ordinarily do because you use the excuse of, I've got so much work to do at my job that I don't have the opportunity or the value of time, the gift of time to do now. And now I'm like, you got the gift, so make it count.
Can we just stay in this theme though? Because you've said some really interesting things. And I know in your discussion with Jen around rest and time and women in leadership roles and being disproportionately displaced in the tech industry, in particular, people of color, Black and brown people, and Black and brown women in particular. You mentioned something to Jen that I found was really interesting. And it's like, so as a Black woman in business, why do you feel that people of color have a harder time finding the time to rest or giving themselves the permission to rest? What is that all about? And how can we help to plug that gap and solve that problem?
It's a great question. And I don't know that I have the best answer for it, but from the historical perspective, let's just take the the start of, the Industrial Revolution, and now people are working on farms in rural places and are going out into cities and metropolises and getting quote unquote corporate jobs or jobs in the big cities, so much so that even after World War II, when women start to get into the workforce more heavily, and then in the 70s, we have all of this empowerment and women are starting to take on even more codified corporate jobs, right? There is this development of a work culture, right? Which we didn't necessarily have in the same way previously, right? But if historically Black and brown people have either been immigrants, voluntarily or involuntarily via slavery to this country, and or across the globe, right? They are heavily institutionalized in their discrimination against those people. So if those individuals are getting into the workforce later, after, different policies have been opened up for women to go to work, then Black and brown people get the opportunities to go to work. And then they're already generations, decades behind, right? In terms of being able to sustain themselves and or build up enough income to buy homes. There's, redlining and all of these restricted covenants that prevent Black and brown people from being able to amass wealth, is the long story short, right? And so in that work corporate culture that has been established, that was never built with women or Black and brown people in mind, it is really no surprise then that when layoffs, large corporate layoffs happen, the people who are least valuable are the people who the system wasn't built for. And those people by design get dispensed of. And so when we're thinking about how to encourage those individuals who are participating in a system that wasn't built for them, how we are trying to encourage them to keep going and to be resilient. It is hard because they're playing a game that wasn't designed for them to play, right? Like if I'm, 5'0" and I'm trying to be drafted into the NBA, that's going to be a very, uphill battle to climb, right? When everybody else is well over 6 foot, whatever. And so that's kind of how it feels as a woman, and specifically a woman of color in the corporate environments, is that I'm in these rooms where no one looks like me. I'm having conversations with people where it's a lot easier for them to talk over me because they're not used to having me in the room. The room wasn't built for me. So I have to make sure that I am taking rest and taking space to replenish myself to go forward in the, for better or worse, battle of operating in spaces that weren't built for me, to try to carve out my own space that can in fact be built for me. Does that make sense? I hope that answers the question.
It does. And I'm so in on this basketball idea, and I'm not a sports person at all, but I want to make one, frankly, visual correction on it. And I shouldn't say correction because it's your vision, but I don't think you're 5 foot in the room full of basketball. I think you're 8 feet tall and you have all the skills that everybody does, but you have your hands tied behind your back, or you can't use your right leg. I think that the visual is right to say there's a game, it's been played for a long time, and I have the right skills, but I look different, and not just physically. Right. There's a physical Black and brown people, but also I look different because my background was different, because I went to school at a different place and I was raised in a different way. And I think that there is an openness that has to be adopted in order for everyone to recognize that. And the one thing I want to say is, when you speak to the historical aspect of it, I mean, look, I'm a woman. I'm not a Black and brown one, or Black or brown one, but I'm a woman with the rest that says, I get mad when I hear this. I get mad when I hear about this push down of, keeping people where they need to be, and redlining and these historical things. And so I want to ask, when you're mad, when you want to get in the game, I'm 8 feet tall, I can play your game. Like, how do you get someone who sees that anger and who sees that societal problem and get them to not do the effort and get them to not come in swinging? How do you approach that from that lens?
One, I think anger and upset is actually a very healthy emotion that we need to learn how to harness and use more effectively. And it doesn't always have to show up in terms of rage, but it can show up in terms of strategy, right? And that's kind of something that I try to encourage others, friends, peers, mentees, students, parents, everyone who I know to consider is that I, by nature and by training, am a storyteller. Right. I studied journalism. I was a professional journalist for many years, and I even do that now in my consulting work. And so it's all about telling the story of whether or not you are qualified and prepared to do a job that the person across the table from you questions whether or not you are qualified and prepared to do, right? And so that is all in storytelling. It's no different than being able to be a salesperson and sell your business, sell your services, sell your wares, whatever it is. You have to be able to tell a story and paint a picture for people why you deserve to be there. And that is an evergreen part of life. Why you deserve to be someone's friend, why you deserve to be someone's romantic partner. It's all of the things around storytelling. And so I think that when we think about that skill set and crafting a story that would resonate with the person across the table from us, that is what I want to remind women, and specifically women of color, to do. There's this thing colloquially called the black tax, which is this presumption that in systems and in cultures, institutionalized cultures that were not built for Black people, that we have to work twice as hard or more in order to get, half as much, right? We have to do this work to prove ourselves. And I do believe that has been proven in many industries, maybe not all, but in many instances, right? However, I think part of that is what we need to do is shift the narrative around, hey, look, if I can tell a story though, can't lie, but if I tell a story that is accurate and reflective of who I am and what I bring to the table, everyone has the ability to be convinced, right? It's in our nature. It's in our, our psyche we like stories, right? We are a storytelling people, right? The human species. And so I think that if we move ourselves away from this concept of I have to work hard in order to get what I want, rather than I have to tell people who I am and craft a narrative that resonates with someone else, I think it is an easier skill set. Actually, I don't think it's harder, but I think it's an underutilized one that I want us all, women of color, people of color, women, immigrants, LGBTQ plus, whomever considers themselves to be a part of a disadvantaged population, to move towards. Tell the story of who you are, because somebody wants to hear it and somebody cares enough to then give you the access and the opportunity. And that's really all it's about. You don't have to, push a boulder up a hill if you don't have to. If you can convince somebody at the bottom of the hill to give you a ride up. I love it.
I'm like raising the roof over here. Yeah. Dr. Kelly, tell us what you're thinking.
Well, that's the takeaway. That's the real, that's the short. It is absolutely brilliant. You're so right on and it's the narrative and how much, Harvard's teaching public narrative now. You see, and CEOs are flocking to these courses because they need to learn how to tell a story so that they can remain relevant in the marketplace and they can connect their purpose with the consumer. Or the person who wants to consume what they have, whether it's their story, their product, their system, their process, it doesn't really matter what it is. And you're here saying, if we could just tell our stories in a way, we know people want to listen. Like you think of like around the campfire at night. What are you doing? You're telling stories. Your kids underneath the tent. You're just trying to scare each other with ghost stories. We tell stories and we love it. Resiliency of the podcast is a story. I love what you've just said. It's so simple, but so darn hard.
It's so true.
Well, and it is simple, but it is worth it. And I think that's what I take from what you just said also is the question was kind of how do we break into this societal thing and the societal infrastructure that holds us back. And the answer is that storytelling is that fluidity that goes through all of the, I'm seeing it as like the structuring, the scaffolding. But more than that, you've also given me an answer, Alexis, and all of our listeners an answer, I think, to something that we talk about this a lot at the Smart Agency. We say, when you are trying to share an idea, share a story, what people really care about is we call it WIFM. What's in it for me? Right? What's in it for me. And what you just shared is, hey, I think you said Shelley was our person who was who was working in tech.
I was like, sure.
I love it, Shelley Kelly. But hey, Shelley, listen, it's worth it to sit and ask and then do, because if you slow down and rest first, you will find your story. Your story is within you. And so there's really what's in it for me is if you go too fast and you just try to fight the scaffolding is going to stand. But if you find the story first, that is such a clear benefit, Alexis, to your strategy, which is rest first, so that you have what it takes to go in and do it. I think that's really applause for Alexis Jeffries.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
I want to ask, though, about there's another part of this, because it's not just about, like, again, who we are and what we look like. I think there is this disproportionate effect for Black and brown people, but there's also a generational effect. And a lot of that, you mentioned this in your talk, it relates to technology. It relates to this 24-hour news cycle, to this pressure that goes beyond really that scaffolding or structure. And now it's all of society. And so I want to ask, you do a lot of research on this within your position as adjunct professor at USC. What have you learned about why people are having a harder time relaxing, and what can you share with us through that lens of kind of technology and demands that might be useful for our listeners to know?
Again, a lot of this is tied to this concept of work culture, right? And I talk about it in the talk that we've transitioned from a work culture to a workaholic culture, right? And that has been tied to corporate demands on performance. It really all started in, I want to say, the 70s, and I can't remember the guy's name, but there was an economist, or perhaps he was a Treasury Secretary of the United States, where they made a recommendation that corporate profits should be tied to CEO performance, right? So, a CEO pay should be tied to corporate profits, right? So if a company is public on the markets and it's doing really well, going gangbusters, so to speak, that CEO should get more money because he's helping the company make more profits. And by extension, the shareholders are making more money. And so they should give him more because he's doing a good job, pat him on the back, right? That creates this work culture that then trickles down to everyone else. Because if the CEO wants his paycheck to be as big can be, guess what? He's going to make expectations and demands, arguably, on his employees from the rest of the C-suite on down to make sure that we're making it happen so I can get my money. Right. And that level of culture transitions into, well, hey, look, I have to work to an exhaustive end to ensure that not only I help the CEO's pay, which we never really think about, that this is why you're working so hard, is so that way a CEO can make more money, but so that I can keep my job. Then it becomes a scarcity mindset where I am going to do this level of work, extraneous work, in order to be able to keep the very little thing, the most important thing that I feel like I have, which is my means to pay my bills. And as that culture has pervaded every industry globally, and it used to be just kind of a American and or arguably North American thing that has transitioned into a European culture where people don't take as many siestas or breaks anymore, or they're cutting PTO across the board, pay time off across the board for many companies that were founded in various countries, not just American companies based abroad. That work culture, which has transitioned into a workaholic culture, makes people feel as though they can't rest. They can't afford to take a break because their job and their livelihood depends on it. But when we step back and think about what that's actually tied to, if you think about how, wow, I'm working so hard and working my tail off and nearly putting myself into an early grave so that way the CEO can make more money. I could go be a CEO and do the same. I could go start my own business if I'm going to have to work this hard, right? It opens up all of these other possibilities for people to be able to explore the reasons why they're doing what they're doing and ask themselves, again, to do the ask, whether or not it's required. This level of work, this level of effort is required. So this is a long-winded answer to your question around multiple generations have endured this. I've watched my mother, who was a sales executive for, eons, for decades, endure this and nearly have heart attacks as a result of the stress and the pressure to make sure that she could provide for her family and maintain her job, right? Because it was all tied to performance. And so when you think about, well, what am I really doing this for? Do I have to endure this? Is there another route? That is something that I think we should be challenging more people to ask themselves, that corporations will never encourage themselves to encourage you to ask yourself, because then you'll probably leave, right? You will probably not want to do that job anymore because there's no reason to be working this hard. And it's a multi-generational problem. I don't know the answer. I don't know that any of us have found an answer, but I think it starts with encouraging people to ask the question, to do some resiliency training, to have resources like this podcast and or the forums like a TED Talk, to be able to explore, hey, look, does it actually make sense for me to go off the deep end for this company that will very easily and likely turn around and lay me off because I'm a dispensable, resource. I'm just very expensive for them, but my humanity maybe is missing. And so I just want to challenge people's presumptions about work and whether or not they have to do the things that they have been told culturally they have to do in order to be successful.
It's an important mouthful that you just said, like
Yeah,
so much of them. I mean, no, but I mean that in the best of ways, Alexis, because sometimes to get it all out, you have to kind of go and get that idea out. And you're speaking about multi-generational kind of, what do they call it? Like in Buddhism, like it's the opposite of aversion, like attraction, or like it's beyond a habit. It's an addiction. You're calling it workaholism. And I think that definitely is fed. And then there's kind of this other narrative of like the humanless corporation, the faceless corporation, the CEO who's taking, more than their share and that kind of stuff. And I think obviously we see that existing in some American companies. I don't know what I'm not, that's not my area of expertise, but I think that we also see, and mine comes from like, I'm a small business owner. I think we also see companies trying to like redo what does that work culture look like in 2024? It is different. There's, in my space, my day job is focused a lot on commercial real estate, which we've heard a lot about office properties and what is that going to be? And so I'm seeing it a lot through that lens. But to tie that back to what you're talking about, which is kind of the person's role, let's tie it all the way back to the narrative. You said, I'm a storyteller, and today we all have to be storytellers. And so now, not only do I need to see my role like as what can my next job be, but it's also, and what does it serve? What is the greater good it's serving? And that is another benefit of slowing down and resting. Instead of, as you mentioned, you talk about your friends who hit that job board so fast. Well, who knows where you might land in another faceless, nameless corporation. And I think that there's a lot of research that's pointing to today's workforce looking for companies of all sizes that really stand for something, and that it's not posturing. It's not, I'm sure that there's plenty of that happening, but there are companies out there who are really trying, I think, to look at the whole human experience of work and how to make people re-engage with it in a way that, Alexis, to your point, giving yourself to a company doesn't have to be a bad thing, but it can be a bad thing. If you're being taken advantage of, it can be. But giving yourself to a company can be a beautiful thing as long as it is your choice to give it, So I'm really kind of pouring thoughts there. To get to a question, I'm going to ask Dr. Kelly Culver to jump in because you've been listening to all this. What do you think? Where is this taking your brain as it relates to resilience and our listeners and how they can benefit from Alexis's really unique perspective here?
Alexis is right that we're in a global, the last 4 or 5 years, we've been in a huge upheaval. We've had COVID, we've had changes in technology, we've had acceleration with AI, we have the war in Ukraine and in the Middle East. And, it's just like, it's this uncertainty. And every day there's something new that's happening, and it's moving at a pace that we're not used to. And I find sometimes when we're uncertain, we freeze because we don't know what to do. And freeze, you hear me argue in this podcast, no, you can't freeze, you have to act. Because if you're a CEO and you freeze, your organization comes to a standstill, and that's not okay. You have to lead through the chaos, lead through the uncertainty, navigate through the storm, if you will. But there's another side to that coin that I think Alexis is giving us. And sometimes that freezing allows insights that you would never have had the privilege of having come into your head because you're open and you're listening. And we're seeing a change around the world on what the future of work looks like. And it's a tough one. Again, it's a tough thing. Like by 2030, we're going to have 85 million jobs unfilled because we don't have the right people with the right skills in the right place at the right time. It's a $6 trillion impact on the global marketplace in unrealized revenue. That's a big deal. And that's something that people should be thinking about and maybe freezing, but it comes back to the issue of work. How do I tell my story to position myself in the right way that's meaningful for me and relevant to the organization I'm choosing to work for? It's a different narrative than we've had in a really long time. Like I remember in the 90s here in Ontario, we laid off people right, left, and center because we were moving. I was in government at the time, and we were moving from doing everything. We're going to be pilots and steering, and we're not going to do the work. And it was a huge shift in terms of getting away from sort of the manufacturing into the professional services. And that hurt. For 10 years, that's a change in the economy, and it hurt. And I think you're giving us some similar lessons on we need to look at these opportunities in different ways. Jen, what do you think? Is it time for our rapid fire questions?
I'm ready. Alexis, are you ready?
As ready as I'm going to be.
Okay.
You know, feel the fear and do it anyway.
That's
There we
right.
go.
That's right. This will not be a lion or a bear.
Okay,
No.
great. Okay,
These
cool.
are easy. These are easy. So what's your favorite movie or TV show that makes you feel resilient?
Ooh, my favorite movie that makes me feel resilient is probably my favorite movie, actually. It's Sister Act 2, Back in the Habit with Whoopi Goldberg. I'm dating myself here, but that is my all-time favorite movie. And I definitely feel like there's a lot of themes around resiliency in that particular film.
All right. Now, what's your favorite song or music that makes you feel resilient?
Oh, you know what? I think it's a real kind of like girl power anthem. It's Sierra, who I love, her song Level Up. It's good for reminding yourself to like get after it and level up. So that makes me feel resilient.
Can you tell us what was the last thing that made you laugh out loud? Like that you don't have to censor or something like that.
Yeah, no, fair. No, my cats. So so I'm one of those childless cat ladies. But it's funny. I recently got another cat for my cat. So I want my first cat, Amelia. She's the sweetest, little, most introverted girl, and I've had her for a while. And I was like, oh, she's a little bored. So I decided to get her a little brother who is rambunctious and got a lot of attitude and energy. And they will just have these little sessions where they're sitting on the couch next to each other and just kind of doing that, just kind of hitting each other a little bit. And I was like, I don't know if this is violent or if this is playful. And so it makes me laugh out loud to see that my whole selfless rationale for getting another cat wasn't because I needed another cat. It was for Amelia. And so I wanted to get her a cat. And so now I feel a good amount of joy watching her enjoy having a little brother.
And Amelia is grateful. I've had both cats and dogs, and Amelia is thanking you right now. We know that.
Amelia is very grateful, even when her younger brother, his name is Carl. Carl is quite the prankster. And he's quite the prankster. He will stand on top of the little litter box cabinet and wait for her to come out so he can like pounce on her. And I'm like, that is, violence. You got to let people come out of the restroom in peace, do their thing.
That's some younger brother stuff right there.
He is. He's a true little brother.
I like Carl.
What a joy.
Yeah.
I think I like Carl.
Yeah.
I feel for Amelia.
Yeah. Yeah, she's feeling like, gosh, she's got a lot of energy. And I was like, yeah, well, he's a young, spry little cat. And so she's like, yeah, okay, well, I guess if that's what we signed up for, then that's what we're working with. So
As long as he gives her rest.
She's not getting much rest these days.
One of the things that we like to ask our guests is, what is a question you'd like to leave for a future guest?
Yeah, my question for our future guests would be, do you feel you've uncovered or tapped into, discovered your purpose? And if so, what is it? And are you working in it right now?
Good one.
Yeah. I will preface that I tend to ask that question because people will say all the time, yeah, I think I've, discovered my purpose, or, or I'm trying to find it. And then I always ask the latter part, well, are you working in it? Or if you haven't discovered it, might you already be working in it and you just never considered that to be your purpose? And it gives people this rationale for like, well, hey, if it's my purpose, if it's what I was kind of born to do and born to give on this planet, shouldn't I be doing it? Shouldn't I be doing it every day? And I've talked to a lot of people who are like, yeah, my purpose is, to have a family, for example. And I'm like, all right, well, are you trying to get out there and have a family? And it's like, well, if it's in you, you'll be doing it and you'll be moving in it. And so that's what I always want to encourage people to do is whatever comes in you and you've got to give, that is more likely your purpose and not just a thought or a thing that you want to do and accomplish. It's not just a goal, it's a purpose, and they are different.
Well, Jenn, we do have a question from, I think maybe you should be the one asking us.
Is it for me?
It's for
Forgive
you
me,
to
I
ask.
was waiting. I always like to give Dr. Kelly a lot of good space in case she has questions. But I would be delighted to ask our final question. Alexis, what a wonderful guest you've been. We so appreciate all of your thinking and wonder. And I really appreciate that last question you asked. This last question is one that was left from a prior guest. And it's a real serious one. Here we go.
Gotcha.
What do you want to be when you grow up?
Oh, yeah, that's great. Because as evidence from my career trajectory and all the places I've lived, it took me a long time to figure that out. But what I think I have come to discover across all of my careers, and we talked a lot about it today, is that who I am as a storyteller. So what I want to be when I grow up is to empower other people to tell their stories authentically and give of themselves in the world, right? So my core, what I call my 5 core tenets, right? They are the makeup of what I consider to be my purpose. They are access, progress, service, justice, and impact. Those 5 things, if I'm asked or given the opportunity to do something and it doesn't ladder up into one or more of those 5 things, I don't do it, right? Because it's not tied to my purpose. And so I consider my purpose really to be storytelling. So I want to empower and give access and make progress in other people telling their stories so that way they can uncover their purpose and give unto the world. Because we were all here to give something. So that's what I'm here to do.
Amen. Alexis, you have inspired me to live in my purpose. And you've really inspired, I think, all of us to look at resilience in a different way through the lens of taking a beat and taking a breath and really finding ourselves in that. I cannot thank you enough for all that you have brought to our podcast today. If our listeners would like to find you, interact with you, learn more about you, I would like to tell them that Alexis does a lot of speaking. She does a lot of different podcasts. Where can they follow you? Where can they find you online?
Sure. So feel free to specifically follow me and connect with me on LinkedIn, because that's where I post a lot of like my professional exploratory things. I'm currently partnering with Soho House to do a series around exploring purpose. And so we're bringing in a lot of different guest speakers and things of that nature. So that's another place that you can find me if you all are Soho House members. And then there will be more news and announcements about things coming out in the future, including said children's book that was mentioned earlier. So,
can you give us one little tiny little peek, like an insight into the children's book, please?
Yes.
Just as we sign off.
Sure. So, working title, so I won't share the title, but what I will share is the premise is really around encouraging young people, school-age children, to explore entrepreneurship. It's specifically young girls and people of color. We oftentimes find ourselves, and we talked a lot about it on this talk today, about thinking that we have to do things that are kind of inside the box, right? We got to go graduate from college and then we got to get a job in this corporate sector. And we don't explore because we don't take the time to ask ourselves, what is it that I really want to do? What is it that I really have to give? And so entrepreneurship is an alternative means by which I can explore who I want to be and what I've got to give. And I want to encourage young people to tap into that at an earlier age. And it goes beyond the lemonade stand. So it's a children's book about a young girl who is starting a business.
I'm enamored. I cannot wait to see it on the shelves. I will definitely be a customer. I think it is so well aligned with what you've talked about the changing work culture and about a changing lens through which to do it. So Alexis, please keep creating, keep sharing. We thank you for joining us. And to all of our listeners, thank you. Thank you for joining us. Please subscribe, follow, become part of our community. We do this for you and with you. And we really find that it is a place that really warms our heart when we get to hear back from you. For me, you can find me online, Jenn Quader, at jennquader.com or at my company, thesmartagency.com. You can also find me on all the social medias at Jenn Quader. And then our wonderful, amazing co-host, Dr. Kelly Culver. You can find her through her company, theculvergroup.ca. That's .ca for Canada. You can also find her on LinkedIn and Instagram as at Dr. Kelly Culver. And then find us, guys, Resiliency, the podcast. You can find us online, resiliencythepodcast.com. You'll find us on all the social channels. Listen, interact. Again, we love you. We encourage you to rest, to take the time to find your own reinvention. And again, with that, thanks for listening to Resiliency, the podcast. Have a beautiful, resilient week ahead.